Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland. So here I am in Parliament Square in London, and I'm going to give you a very brief tour of Westminster, which is strictly speaking a city within London. And you can possibly recognise what's behind me, Big Ben, which refers to the clock tower, not the whole building as some people think, or the whole complex of buildings. So Big Ben, the clock named after the Clerk of Works, who helped build it, Ben Hall, in the late 19th century. It's been under repair for almost 6 years now. It was supposed to be completed late last year. And you see they've cleaned the stone higher up. Compare it to the darker, grimier stone of the rest of the Palace of Westminster. This complex building is the Palace of Westminster, or indeed the House of Parliament. Both names are valid. It is a royal palace, despite the fact that no member of the royal family has lived there for centuries. So Big Ben is famous for chiming. It's a distinctive ring is heard all over central London. It's not 12 noon, despite what it says. Only one clock face is working at the moment, and they are not using the Great Bell there, except on festive occasions such as New Year. Anyway, and then you can see a bit of the House of Lords to the House of Commons, and over here where you can see some of the Westminster Hall, which is built under William Rufus and completed around his death in 1100, is the oldest part of the building. So the House of Commons debating chamber and the House of Lords were adapted from chapels, as they had aisles on each side. Well, they had an aisle and they had benches on each side, which is why they're facing each other. Some people say the trouble is that layout makes it too adversarial, or to be a hemicycle like the Scottish Parliament, and make things more consensual or more cooperative rather than this us and them idea, the other side of the aisle, that expression which shows how they'll be knocking 7 bells out of each other. So a bit of Westminster Hall. You can see there's great hammer beam roof there, and it's been the site for various things, such as the trial of King Charles I, the trial of the gunpowder plotters, when a foreign head of state, de Gaulle, Barack Obama, whoever, or President Higgins of Ireland, when they address the two houses, this is the only place they can meet. So one of the key holders there is a Speaker of the House of Commons. It's currently Sir Lindsay Hoyle. And where Donald Trump was on his state visit a few years ago, the key holder at the time, well, the Speaker, was Sir John Bercow, and he refused permission for Donald Trump to speak there because he so loathed him. Now, some people thought that breached the Speaker's neutrality, because he or she, upon being elected Speaker of the House of Commons, will resign from his or her party and have to act in a neutral manner, and that was giving vent to his views. There you can see a statue of Cromwell there. A highly contentious figure. Some of the Home Rule Party objected to that being erected because of the Drogheda massacre and the Waterford massacre. And further on you can see the Sovereign Tower, which is actually much taller than that tower where Big Ben is. So when Her Majesty the Queen comes here for the State Opening of Parliament, the first week of November, she'll always go in through that entrance. They will lower the Union flag and they'll hoist the Royal Standard when she arrives. Obviously when she leaves, they reverse that process. So Westminster Hall, as I say, dates from the late 11th century. But the rest of it dates from after 1834, because there's a fire in 1834, but they were burning these sticks which have been used for counting votes in Parliament, and that fire raged out of control, and this mighty conflagration consumed most of the complex of buildings. So the fire brigade duly arrived, and they were able to save either Westminster Hall or I think it was the House of Commons debating chamber, and they made the right decision, in my view, to save Westminster Hall, which is the older of the two buildings. And so it was rebuilt after 1834, and it took over 30 years to complete. So what you're seeing here is often sort of mock medieval. It was to Charles Barry, and it was Augustus Pugin, the architects who designed it. It's very distinctive. The Hungarian Parliament, which sits beside the mighty River Danube, is modelled on it to some extent. Obviously, the other side of the House of Parliament, you'll see old Father Thames, who idles by. I remember famously in 2006, there was a whale, came all the way up the River Thames and was parked off here for a few weeks. I think he finally returned to the sea. So what else about the Houses of Parliament? It's got those two buildings, it's got various offices for MPs, Peers of the Realm and so on, and little extra committee rooms for the Select Committee. There are a number of Select Committees in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. There'll be a Finance Select Committee, an Education Select Committee, a Health Select Committee, an intelligence select committee, a media select committee, and so forth. And there'll be up to 20 MPs in each select committee. There'll be a chair of the select committee who's not necessarily from the governing party. And the MPs who are on a select committee will be in approximate proportion to the strength of those parties in the House of Commons. For instance, if there were 20 MPs, there would be, say, 12 Conservatives, maybe 6 Labour, 1 SNP, and 1 Liberal Democrat. And so it would go like that. So they hear from expert witnesses who are brought in to answer questions like, Ian Hislop, the editor of The Private Eye, for example, answering questions to this committee about standards in public life. So it's a bit like the select committee situation which you'd find in the US Congress, and it's a less febrile atmosphere. It's not so ferociously partisan. So you'll notice that debates in the House of Commons and House of Lords are often very sparsely attended. They meet Monday to Friday about 9 in the morning to about 9 o'clock at night. Of course, MPs aren't here all the time. They go back to their constituencies, of which there are 650, some which are far away, like the Western Isles of Scotland, for instance. So they might only be in Westminster 1 or 2 days a week. And Parliament has a recess over Easter, and then in the summer, from August into September, into actually early October. So they're meeting all to the end of July. And then August they can go on holiday. Late September to early October is party conference season. About the middle of October they come back. The Conservative Party, under the glory days of Margaret Thatcher, always had their party conference to go over the 13th of October, it being Maggie Thatcher's birthday, so they could always sing her happy birthday while she would jubilantly wave to them from the podium. So this is Parliament Square, and that various political luminaries are honoured here by having their statues erected, and you'll see their very fine plinths upon which they stand. Various prime ministers and leaders of Commonwealth countries. And here you see Sir Robert Peel. I made a video about him, that Tory Prime Minister who helped repeal the Corn Laws, which split his party, and only about a third of them stayed with him. The Peelites were briefly formed. There's only one ever Peelite Prime Minister, the Earl of Aberdeen. Anyway, and here we see Nelson Mandela, the first black president of South Africa, who assumed that office in 1994, served one term before retiring in 1999, and then he died in December 2013. And he did pay one trip to London before he was incarcerated for anti-apartheid activities. So he was released in 1990, and he helped dismantle the system of racial discrimination. In some ways, a catastrophic president, as in it had one of the highest murder rates in the world, but good on achieving racial reconciliation. Here we have Mahandas Karamchand Gandhiji, known by the honorific Mahatma, as in great soul. This Gujarati barrister who was sometime leader of the Congress party in India, but not prime minister. A great ecumenist, assassinated by a fellow Hindu for his wish to go to Pakistan and his preaching of reconciliation with Pakistan. And here we have Beaconsfield, as in the Earl of Beaconsfield. That is Benjamin Disraeli, the only ever Jewish Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Having said that, he was ethnically, not religiously Jewish. At the age of 12, he'd adopted the Christian faith and become a member of the Church of England, which was much more advantageous back then. So I've been to Hewindon Manor in Buckinghamshire, which was a stately home where indeed he is interred. And there he's wearing his regalia. So the United Kingdom is surely unique in erecting the statues of its former enemies in the heart of its capital. There's one of George Washington, not here, but on Trafalgar Square, a gift of the Commonwealth of Virginia to the people of Great Britain and Ireland in 1921. Because obviously when the whole of Ireland were all part of the UK back then, I doubt that the United States would accept a statue of King George III. Millicent Garrett Fawcett, this woman who was a fervent campaigner for votes for women, and indeed her sister was the very first woman to qualify as a doctor in the United Kingdom. And we're going to come on to the Earl of Darby, who was a Tory Prime Minister. So Stanley is the surname. Family very prominent in the English Midlands, at least since the 15th century. You know, the Stanleys played a hinging role, what would the words say, decisive role in the Battle of Bosworth on the 22nd of August 1485. And here he is. Okay, so leading the Conservatives back into office after they've been defeated over the Corn Laws and had great difficulties in the early 1850s. And here we have Viscount Palmerston, a Liberal Prime Minister. I think I'm right in saying the last one to die in office. So I know there's that, he takes his title from that town in County Dublin, but he'd never lived in Ireland. He's possibly born in London, possibly at his family seat in Hampshire. and he was, because he's an Irish peer, he could be elected to the House of Commons. And here we come to Jan Christian Smuts, again an erstwhile enemy of the United Kingdom, a South African Afrikaner. Sorry, I think it's pronounced Smuts, his surname. And I knew his great-grandsons, in fact. So, and he had an English language education. He went to Cambridge University where he read law, then was practicing law in South Africa, but fought for the Transvaal Republic and the Oranje Vrystaat in 1899 to 1902, but eventually reconciled with the United Kingdom and the British Empire, calling it the widest system of organised freedom in the world. And who do we have here? David Lloyd George, put up a few years ago, and you see his billowing cape. That was his trademark. Well into the 1930s, suspected he would return to national government in some form. The last Liberal Prime Minister of the UK, just over a century ago, he resigned, partly over the Charnock crisis. He was a Liberal PM leading a mainly Conservative government, but had been a hate figure for Tories at the time of the Second Boer War. So his daughter became a Labour MP, and his son, Willem, a National Liberal, i.e. Conservative. His son, Willem, was Home Secretary. Many people thought he was Prime Minister. So Lord George was ennobled as the Earl of Darby in the New Year's Honours 1945, but he only had 2 months to enjoy it because he died in March 1945. You can see footage of his funeral on YouTube, and he's buried in an ordinary field upon which cattle graze in accordance with Welsh custom. So a very famous Welshman who was actually born in Manchester, and his surname was actually George. He was brought up by his maternal uncle, Mr. Lloyd, so then he went by that double-barrel surname, Lloyd George. That wasn't hyphenated. And here, a man who should need no introduction, Winston Churchill, but he looks rather crook-backed and decrepit there, showing him when he's a geriatric. So perhaps not the most flattering image of him, but why? Is it to show that he's, as you would probably say, buggering on, and he's resolute, uncomplaining, and only one word, as in he needs no introduction, born November 1874 and died in January 1964, father of the house, as in the longest continuously serving MP for a while, a Conservative, a Liberal, and then a Conservative again. His own word, ratted and re-ratted. You see there's this deaf protest why it's rather quiet. So I've done a brief circuit of Parliament Square, and you can see the police on duty here. There's a little memorial because there was a terrorist attack almost 5 years ago. One of the police officers was murdered. So this is where the members of Parliament can drive in. In the middle is a green field flag with the portcullis, the symbol of the United Kingdom government. And there's a bit of a moat, so it's free to go in there. Airport style security, they don't need to bring your passport. You can go on tours, which you have to pay for, but going in for free, you can sit in the gallery and watch a debate. You can't just wander around, and their ushers are dressed up to the nines, like in this evening tail suit, to make sure you behave. Go watch the House of Commons, or indeed watch the House of Lords, so long as it's on. But the tours are on weekends, if memory serves. If a peer MP knows you, he or she can bring you to tea and things like that. There are other things. I've heard of even people hiring out for wedding receptions, but that was in the 60s. So here's St Stephen's, Westminster, which is the parish church of Westminster, and beyond it is Westminster Abbey. So that's the city of Westminster takes its place in this. Obviously, the city of London is a few miles of that away to the east, and this was the Westminster. Minster meaning like another word for a great church, really. And it really was an abbey, and there were Benedictines here till the 1530s when Henry VIII closed down the religious houses. Okay, so you had to pay a pretty penny to go in there. It's about £25 these days, and that is really the United Kingdom's Valhalla. Lots of prime ministers, kings and queens are laid to rest there. They're Poets' Corner with memorials to several of them. You can't film or take photos in there, and you can't even tell someone much about it, or you'll be accosted by someone in a scarlet cloak saying, well, where's your blue badge? You're not a blue badge tour guide. One of my Russian adult pupils, I was giving him a tour in Russian of it, and this woman rather rudely challenged me on that basis. So there is worship there, and the coronation was there, the wedding of Will and Kate, and so on. And here's the Supreme Court. So that is just a whistle-stop tour of Parliament Square, a little bit, really the heart of Westminster. So obviously an extremely important place. The Westminster system of government is being emulated by many countries, and there are places like, well, Westminster College at Fulton, Missouri, where Winston Churchill in February 1946 delivered his celebrated Iron Curtain oration. And you can see over the road, there's that statue of Abraham Lincoln. He's got a chair behind him, but he's not sitting down. Well, over the road, eventually we'll see George Canning, this older Tony-Knoxonian Irish, I think it was barrister too, Tory Prime Minister, who died in office after only 3 months. No other Prime Minister has died in office quite so soon. And then various government ministries, because there's a street called Whitehall, which is a synecdoche for the civil service. There's the Treasury, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Welsh Office, the Scottish Office, the Ministry of Defence, and others. And then down Victoria Street, you can't quite see it from this angle, there's the Home Office, the Ministry for Justice, and various other government departments. So these are designed by Gilbert Scott right at the start of the 20th century. So not as old as you might think. Okay, so that there is the Treasury. And the Prime Minister goes by car for Prime Minister's Question Time, just before 12 noon every Wednesday. But there's a bit of a security risk there because obviously an assassin would know exactly where he's going to go and when. Now he could walk just to discombobulate him occasionally. I thought, why not build a tunnel from this corner of the Treasury to the Houses of Parliament complex, because it's only about 100 metres. And in the long run, that would be a big security saving, saving the police officers time and therefore money. You know, time is money. You see, from there to there. Yeah, from this building here, underground to there. You see where Big Ben is? Just the corner of that, not all the way to Big Ben, but just so long as you're inside the security fence. Okay, that's enough from me. So thank you for following me and book tours with me and all sorts of online lessons, everyone. All right, and we're on Great George Street. What a fantastic name. Toodaloo.